Justice League is the new movie in the DC universe. It's the sequel, of course, to Man of Steel, the story of Superman, and then Superman versus Batman, or Batman versus Superman, this big blockbuster movie that disappointed a lot of fans of the DC universe. And everybody was waiting for Justice League. I was very much looking forward to this because I'm a massive fan of Superman from when I was small. I love those comics. I grew up with them. The rest of the Justice League was a bit less known to me, although I really tremendously enjoyed the latest Wonder Woman movie. And with the Batman franchise, I've had hits and misses. Some movies I liked and some I didn't like that much. But to have all these superheroes, plus 3 new ones, of which we already knew at least one a little bit better, the Flash, added to the team. I mean, who doesn't look forward to a movie like that? And so I'm going to give you my in-depth review. What I'm going to do is the first few minutes will be spoiler-free. I will just give you my initial impression, and I'll give you some recommendations as to whether to go watch this movie or not. And then there will be mild spoilers. I'll assume that you've watched the movie or that you don't care and you don't want to watch it. So let's start with the spoiler-free section. Justice League as a movie was kind of a troubled production. It was helmed by director Zack Snyder, who also was at the helm of Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, so it kind of made sense that he would also do this third movie. If it is a trilogy, that's kind of what you want, and that makes sure you get a certain consistency in the style. However, there was a tragic event in Zack Snyder's life. You may have read this. His daughter committed suicide, and that was a totally unexpected thing. And he immediately decided to step back from the movie. And so they brought in Joss Whedon, that we all know as the director of the Avengers, and I think he did also another Avengers movie. He's much more tied to the Marvel movies, but kind of made sense to bring in a very experienced superhero movie director to kind of finish the job. And so Joss Whedon took over. Most of the production had already been done, so the script was already written. A lot of the principal photography was already finished. But he decided, based on what he saw, because he was going to do the whole editing and the post-production, he decided that it was necessary to rewrite the script, to add lines and to re-record a number of scenes. And also in the editing process, he apparently was very influential on the final result of this movie. So the main story was created by Zack Snyder, who's kind of was known for his kind of darker edge, definitely not the Marvel style. And so people were like, so what is this going to give as an end result? Is this going to be still a Zack Snyder movie, or is this going to be much more like a lighthearted Marvel movie? Added to that, also the reviews of Batman vs. Superman were not generally positive. A lot of people criticized the darker tone. So everyone kind of expected that this Justice League movie would be a little bit more Joss Whedon-esque in a certain way. Did they succeed? Well, yes and no. This movie is short, much shorter than Man of Steel, and certainly shorter than Batman vs. Superman, which was way too long, actually, if you ask me. This is a 2-hour movie. It's really short, even compared to other superhero movies. So it's very short, which has as a consequence that it is, there's a fast pace. There's a lot happening. And the first half of the movie is all about the introduction and reintroduction of the characters that are part of the Justice League. So the characters that we've already seen in previous movies, but there are also 3 new superheroes, Aquaman and the Flash. And I always forget the name of the third one because he's not as known. Well, I guess any DC fan is very acquainted with this guy. For me, there was a new superhero, Cyborg, and of course, every superhero needs a backstory, needs an introduction. The downside of having 6 people to introduce is that it takes a lot of time, and so it felt rushed. It felt as if every superhero got about the same introduction time. For some, it was not enough. For like a guy like Cyborg, I would have wanted to see much more. Aquaman, likewise, is a very interesting character, but you want to know more about why he is part of the story. But perhaps that's something that they will explain later on in the standalone movies. So, first half of the movie, introduction, introduction, introduction. A little bit too much. And I remember looking at my watch, not because I was bored, but it was just I was curious. So once the introductions were done, we were exactly at the halfway point. And then the actual story still has to begin. Now, the final character in this movie that, of course, is essential to the success of this story is the bad guy, the villain. And that was a bit of a disappointment. It is it's not a bad villain. Well, he is a very bad villain, but he's very much run-of-the-mill. It's one of those CGI villains of which we've seen so many others. And even his motivations and the way he is threatening the world is almost as if they completely copied it from a number of other, both Marvel and DC movies. There was really nothing new, and it was kind of a very superficial villain, which has as an effect that the stakes are not that high, because you're like, oh, it's another villain. They're going to win in the end, because this villain is so outrageous and has, such crazy plans, and it's basically, mass destruction. Of course, he's never going to win, because after all, we're still here. The Earth is still there. The Justice League is probably going to give us some more movies. So it kind of lowers the stakes. And that has a bad effect on the overall quality of the story. I felt much less engaged. Second half of the movie, I was constantly like, yeah, it's cool. It's definitely well done. Special effects are great, and it's well paced and everything. But I've already seen all this. It feels too familiar. There was nothing that surprised me. So then finally, one very redeeming aspect of this movie was its humor. That's definitely where you feel the touch of Joss Whedon. There were a lot of one-liners. However, you can tell that it's a bit of a compromise, because the kind of the visuals of the movie are still pretty dark. The storytelling is a bit brooding sometimes. There's Batman, who is this super depressed guy all the time. And he brings down the levity of the story and of the rest of the characters. There's one character, however, who's really the shining star of Justice League, and it's not the one that you expect. You're thinking about the blue guy with the red cape. No, I'd say the Flash. The Flash is great. He's funny. He's genuinely funny, and there's some really good subtle acting. And that was the character that really made me laugh. Aquaman has one funny moment, but on the whole, you kind of feel that he's underserved by this movie. And Cyborg is very serious. Wonder Woman is just being Wonder Woman, and that's okay. That's fine. But again, that doesn't really add anything. So, final spoiler-free thought about this movie. Is it worth your time? I'd say yes. It's a fun movie. But don't go in there into your theater with high expectations that this is going to top all other DC movies. You're going to be disappointed. This is an okay movie, I would even say. I would give it a 7 out of 10. Again, I wasn't bored at all. It's entertaining, it's fun, but it was much less innovative and surprising than I had hoped it to be. Again, if you like DC, if you like these characters, you definitely want to go and watch this movie. But again, it's not as good as I hoped it would be. All right, spoiler time. Let's go a little bit more in depth about what I thought. So I've already explained some of my gripes with the movie, but let's go over the various characters that make up the Justice League. Let's start with Aquaman. That was definitely visually one of the most interesting characters. He's played by the big guy from Game of Thrones, the one from the first 2 seasons. Here is Aquaman. He's filmed in this ice. I think they filmed this in Iceland, and so he's like, you kind of associate Aquaman that we know from the comics with the more tropical waters, because it's kind of warm to swim in, but he's like diving into ice cold water. And he's this very grumpy guy, very rough. but he has a funny scene. He's a little bit like the Hulk in a certain way, like this pure power, but he's also able to kind of relativize himself. They actually did cut out a lot of his backstory. There was a part of his story was that he would go to Atlantis, and we would see his interaction with some of the other. They even, I think, there was like a major actor that was cut out because they didn't have time enough. They didn't want this movie to be too long, and so there was just one character who was like, "Oh, I expected so much more of Aquaman." Apparently, there's going to be a standalone movie, so hopefully he will have his feature-length movie, but it's definitely a disappointment. Then you have Batman. Of course, we've seen Batman in the previous Batman versus Superman, in which he was so irrational in many ways. It's way too dark. And in this movie, it's the same Batman, but there are a few one-liners that are supposed to be funny included, but they don't work. They fall flat. It's almost as if Batman is constantly bored. He's not really engaged. He's not really interested. And even the kind of the one of the central points in this movie is, of course, him reuniting with Superman. Even that was kind of like, is that it? It's, just a few one-liners? There's so much dramatic material from the previous movie, and you do the reunion in just 30 seconds? Nah, I expected way more. It's kind of like this Batman, for me, has to go for the future of DC. I think this is too dark. Of course, he's the Dark Knight, but he brings the movie down because, especially, like, everything is told from his perspective. Every introduction of every character has Batman in it as well, and it's too much Batman. It doesn't work. It's supposed to be a team, not just Batman and some minor characters. All right, Superman, of course. Spoiler: Superman returns. You would think that would be a big deal, and there are some cool moments after his resurrection, but it is devoid of any mythological depth. One of the interesting things that Zack Snyder did, according to me, in Man of Steel and in Batman vs. Superman, was that they gave Superman this kind of messianic air. You know, he's supposed to be the savior of the world, but then the world doesn't accept the light that Superman is. Like, as a priest, of course, I love those themes. It's very theological. In this movie, it's completely flat. It's like, oh, I'm alive again. Okay, these are bad guys. I'm going to kill you, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're not bad guys. Okay, well, we're fine. We're good. And it's like, even his reunion with the love of his life, Lois Lane, is so small and so really cliche. And you have such great actors. And then they don't get enough room to breathe. It's really, really disappointing, especially because there was so much at stake and there's nothing left. It's just like, okay, here I'm back. Let's go fight this CGI bad guy. Wonder Woman is great, and of course, who didn't love the first Wonder Woman movie? But again, she's relegated to the second plan. She's still like more of a supporting character, and she cannot, with her cheerfulness and her optimism and her hopefulness, she still cannot cure that depressing presence of Batman everywhere. So it's good. There is also a part that takes place in Amazonia, or the place where she used to live, and that feels really like fan service. It has nothing to do with the rest of the story. It's just like, oh, you loved Wonder Woman. Let's show you some more scenes that look exactly what you saw in Wonder Woman. Then again, it was enjoyable. The Flash and Cyborg are great. Cyborg is interesting. Cyborg is one of those kind of more brooding characters. It has a backstory. It's very conflicted. But at the same time, you feel that this is a guy who goes through a transformation, and transformation stories are always interesting. The Flash is funny. He's very kind of clumsy, and it's slightly different from the Flash that we know from the TV series. Both are good, although I'm kind of more familiar with the TV Flash. It was kind of jarring to see another actor playing the same role, but they're kind of similar. But there's less evolution in his character. So Cyborg, being the least known character of the whole bunch to a non-DC connoisseur, to me was the most interesting character. And again, I just missed a lot of backstory. I wanted to see more of Cyborg, and he basically, his role is the fixer who just diffuses the bomb. That's basically it. And it's like, okay, it's not a very interesting thing for him to do. Again, I hope that we'll get a standalone movie. Now, my biggest gripe, of course, is the villain. He's very generic, and his motivation seems to be, I want to destroy the world. I want to turn this world into the hell of which I came. And here are all my minions, and they're also going to destroy the world. And it's like, that's it? That's not very interesting. You're like the next in line, you know? It's like almost like the monster of the week that you had in all those like old-fashioned B movies, or in the serialized science fiction series, where it's just the bad guy of the week. And that is, for me, the biggest flaw of this movie. There's nothing really at stake. We know that the Justice League can kill them. And even Superman, you'd think that him being kind of the guy who lives again after dying, he would play a major role, that there would be something happening between the villain and him. Nope. Just, hey, I'm Superman. I'm strong. I'm much stronger than you. Let me just... That's it. And like, okay. Yeah, I guess. Really not as good as I expected it to be. Then again, final thoughts. This, of course, was a troubled production. I mean, I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been for Zack Snyder to be involved in this movie and to spend so much time in this, everybody expecting so much, and then just in real life, something majorly tragic happens. And then the grief and the panic, of course. So what do we do now? And I'm bringing in Joss Whedon. And, of course, all the fans are watching this very close by. Everybody has an opinion, and there is so much talk about this movie. Those are difficult circumstances to create a good, balanced movie. What I liked was that there's definitely an opening, and you have to sit in the movie until after the credits. If you've already seen the movie, you know that. But if you missed that, if you walked away during the credits, you may want to go back and or look it up on the web, because there is definitely some indications as to what the next story is going to be, and that's going to introduce a new villain. So this is definitely not the last time that we see the Justice League, and I really think and I trust that the next Justice League movie will be a lot better than this one. So again, give this a 7 out of 10. It's an enjoyable movie. If you're a fan of the DC universe and the superheroes, go watch it. You won't. There's really nothing to really be upset about. But in terms of expectations, I had really hoped that this movie would be much better than it actually is. But it's a good start.